my basic thesis is, I guess, kind of a basic question more than a basic thesis. And the question is, why do we get away with talking so much bullshit when it comes to mental health or psychology? Without any doubt, you couldn't do this in any other field. Engineering, for example, you can't get away with bullshit with engineering. You'd build a bridge and it'd collapse. So we have to get the engineering right. It's not just free flow fantasy, whatever goes, whatever it is. And obviously it's like that for a lot of things, but not for mental health as far as I can see. And this is something, it's not just a passing thought. It's something that I personally have found evident the whole time, ever since I first started working in the field of mental health. That somehow it's as if we're allowed to talk bullshit. And there's this kind of thing that it's fine as long as no one ever actually draws attention to it or says anything, because that isn't fine. It's supposed to go along. And in order to get along, we have to go along. So there's all of that. And if you want to make a career in mental health, you have to go along with the bullshit that's talked. So why is this? We might ask. I might ask. Anybody could ask. And one reason, possible reason is, I think, because deep down inside of us, we don't actually want to have too much clarity. We don't really want to know what's going on. Which means that we don't really care what kind of red herrings are thrown out there. The more the better, really, because it distracts us from the truth. So it's a free-for-all, really. Any idiot can come along and spout any kind of nonsense, and in a way we're happy enough, because the more nonsense the better. So that's one theory. It's not a bad theory. It makes a lot of sense. Once we consider the most basic psychological fact of all, is that the most basic fundamental thing that we have to understand in psychology is that everything is predicated upon self-deception. Absolutely everything. And it absolutely has to be. Because the sense of ourselves that we have and that we operate on the basis of is a total fabrication, a total fantasy. And if that fantasy is to be enabled to carry on, obviously we have to keep on rolling out the we have to keep on rolling out the bullshit. We have to keep away from it, the truth. Because the truth burns. The truth is a terrible thing. Which is why Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas, he was kind of warning people, look, watch out. If you come near me, you're going to be burned. Burned up, there's going to be nothing left of you. You're going to be totally burned up. So, unless that's what you want, stay away from me. And that isn't what we want as a whole. So there's another anomaly here, in that we have a thing called the Christian religion, which is based on the teachings of Jesus. But somehow, in our representation of Jesus and his teachings, there's no danger of us being burned up or the ego being burned up. Actually, it's been shifted around to enhance the ego so that we can go around with self-righteous egos, smug egos, spiritual egos, egos that think that they're on the right path. And that's not what Christianity started out being all about, I wouldn't say. It's not a cult to promote egos. Well, it is, but it wasn't originally. So maybe we could say religion's like another subject where it's a free-for-all in terms of talking bullshit. Because in religion, like in psychology, we don't want to know what the true picture is, because we have to hold on to the primary number one illusion, which is the illusion of who we'd like to think we are, or what we'd like to think we are. And this isn't such a hard idea to understand. What we're talking about is living in the cave, Plato's cave. We're talking about living in the shadows. Stuff can thrive in the shadows, but when the light gets switched on, that's pitiless. Our bullshit can't thrive anymore. And our bullshit is everything, really. That's all we've got, and if that goes, we don't know what else there would be. So we're really very frightened about losing it. And we will, of course, deny that, and we will bullshit to the best of our ability and say that we're very interested in the truth, that we love the truth. But that's bullshit. We love bullshit. But when we love bullshit, we're not going to go around saying, I love bullshit, because that wouldn't be bullshit. It has to be bullshit. If I go around saying I love bullshit, then I'm not bullshitting. So what am I saying? That's kind of I'm contradicting myself. One good way of illustrating this tendency to talk a lot of bullshit, just to narrow the field down a bit, is addiction. I think addiction is a subject where an awful lot of bullshit is talked and accepted, swallowed. Hook, line and sinker, we swallow it down. And this is weird because addiction is such a major thing. It's massive. And it causes so much pain. So why aren't we being real about it? Why are we saying something useful? Why do we come out with the crap that we do come out with? So I suppose, having said that, I have to try and illustrate the fact that we are talking crap about it, which is what I'd like to do in the next 10 minutes or so. Try and prove my point, or demonstrate my point, that we talk a lot of bullshit with regard to addiction, just the same as with regard to all other mental health issues. So the most obvious bullshit in addictions is to say that it's all about willpower. And this really is bullshit, and we know it's bullshit. And within the field itself, we know it's bullshit. But in terms of just the average person who hasn't had the education of going through being an addict and doesn't really know anything about it, or hasn't had the experience of recognizing themselves as an addict, might be a better way of putting it. But in that case, what we automatically think it's about willpower. I had a kind of brief enough argument with some guy online, which is easy enough to do if that's what you're looking for, an argument online. And he was saying, look, the thing about addiction is it's just pure willpower. Step away. If you're drinking, don't drink. Just don't do it. It's willpower, pure willpower. So if you have enough willpower, you will cure addiction. This is what this guy was saying. He's not alone in saying it. He's not the first person to say it, but I'll pick on him because he's a good example. So I was trying to get him to say, well, how do you know that? Where does this come from? What experience have you got with addictions? How can you say such a thing when anyone that has truly been through the mill of addiction will absolutely not say that? Any addict will say, no, you misunderstood it completely. So I was saying, well, why do you say this? You had experience of addiction. Where did you get this from? Unfortunately, the argument didn't go very far because he just kept saying, well, I know. I just know myself. It's obvious I know. And maybe for some people, their willpower can't do it. But for me, I have the willpower to do it. So that's what you call the kind of illusion of that an ego has when it's so sure of itself, because it's never been damaged. It's never been crushed, or it's never been impaired, or it's never lost its integrity. So in that case, that the ego has this fantastic belief. It's like, we believe we're Superman. We've got our underpants on the outside of our trousers. We actually believe we are Superman. That's the shiny ego before it gets the crap knocked out of it. In which case it can turn into a disillusioned, cynical ego, a grumbling ego, a negative ego, whatever. But there is this phase of an ego where we just think, I can do anything, and if other people are obviously stuck, it's because there's obviously something wrong with them. Some inherent weakness or inferiority. So it's kind of a fascist thing, really, this belief, because the ego is essentially a fascist, of course. So if I do believe that it's all about willpower, that means every time I come across someone who's got an addiction of some sort, I'm automatically thinking it's your fault. So really this is a blaming thing. It's a blaming thing. Makes me feel good, doesn't help anyone else. It doesn't even help me really, because it's bullshit, but it makes me feel good in the short term. But why isn't addiction about willpower? It seems like it should be. Just keep on saying no. Say no. Say no, kids. Say no to that bad stuff. And it's a little bit hard to explain, because we need to change paradigms. And we need to change the paradigm in particular, which says the ego is who we are, and it's not an ego, it's not a construct, it's not a kind of particular way of looking at things that is constructed around the thinking mind and its fantasies, to another paradigm. And that's difficult, but that's what we have to do if you want to talk about it. So the thing is that what we call willpower is really just ego strength. It's that ego that has the willpower, and it's the ego that deceives itself into thinking its willpower is a real thing instead of some kind of self-deception. And supposing that I am having the experience of being sucked right into addiction, and I've gone through this. So what I discover is that willpower isn't any good. A lot of people would say it is, and you could make the argument that if you have this right willpower, determination, and you have a system, then that will suffice to free us from addiction. And that's pretty much what AA says, because they have a system, and in order to stick to that system, you have to have the determination. So any AA head will say, yeah, if you've got the right system and you try hard, you'll be free from addiction eventually. Although you can't ever afford to go away from this system is something else they say, because otherwise you'll fall back into evil ways. So you have to stick with the system, which is kind of evidence really that AA is a cult more than anything else, but never mind that. But the thing is that whenever I fight against my addiction, struggle against my addiction, attempt to overcome it, all these lovely words we like to use in mental health in a foolish way, what we're doing is we're establishing a counter ego, another ego to fight against the first ego. Now, if you do belong to a group like AA or any other group, there's lots of, and you adopt this particular attitude, and you take on board this particular system, this particular way of looking at the world, there's a huge lot of strength in that ego, because it's validated on all sides, and every time you go to an AA meeting, that particular the AA ego is validated, and it's like there's a lot of strength there. So if you do stick with the program as they say, and you can become free from the primary addiction, say drink. You can, not necessarily likely, but you could do. But in that case, if you do that, so what's happened, you've kind of put your foot on the neck of the addiction ego, the alcohol ego, and you've created another type of controlling ego that is created in opposition to addiction. So it's like an anti-addiction ego, or it's kind of like a super ego. It's like a moral thing. It's a moral ego. And that ego doesn't need to drink, but it does need to control things and reiterate its core beliefs over and over again. And as we all know, as a lot of us know, that type of ego is deadly. It's appalling. It's that's not living. That's just identifying with this another crappy ego. So the self of addiction, if we identify with the self of addiction, that's a crappy life, and it gets worse all the time. If we identify with the self of overcoming the addiction, struggling against the addiction, that's crappy as well. That's another ego. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what ego, they're all the same. They can switch colours or they can switch flags, but they're all basically the same. And the reason that we can't say that we're free from an addiction because we're just addicted to something else. We're addicted to a system. In other words, we're dependent upon it. Our autonomy is lost. Everything is about the system, which is nothing more than a set of rules. It is a system. So to be dependent upon a system for our continual well-being is a state of addiction. We're addicted to the system. We need it in order to carry on. But freedom from addiction means we don't need anything and we don't have to fight against anything. And the original addiction doesn't have to carry on being a big issue for us because we're still addicted then. It's a bit like if I want to rebel against society and I say society is stupid and they're all just sheep and I'm going to be different, and I use that to define myself. So I'm still defining myself in terms of society, as Ram Dass says, just as much as the most straightest person there ever was. It's just that I'm identifying myself the other way around, and I'm saying who I am is this rebel against society. So I'm still constructing myself in relation to society, which is ridiculous. I'm not free from society then. Society is another addiction, living in terms of a group and believing what other people believe, seeing the world in the way other people see it. That's an addiction. It takes away from our autonomy. It annihilates our autonomy. It annihilates our mental health. Without autonomy, there is no mental health. There is only dependency on an external system. So no matter what we do, it's always about dependency on an external system. So we can swap external systems, we can swap dependencies, but it's make the slightest bit of difference. It's like giving up cocaine and taking heroin, or giving up heroin and taking MDA or something. Just swapping one drug for another. So the problem is that whenever I resist, fight against, exercise willpower, I am creating an ego. I am creating a self that is orientated around that particular stance. So that it is impossible to resist anything without automatically creating the self of resistance, without automatically creating another self, which is why, as Krishnamurti says, the self cannot annihilate itself, because if it does, all we're doing is creating the self which annihilates the self, or the self which beats up the self, or the self which criticizes and berates the self, which is very, very common because we all do that. We look at ourselves, we don't like ourselves, so we create another self to criticize that self. They call that the inner critic. It's not an inner critic, it's just another ego. It's an ego that exists in relation to slagging off the basic ego, which has got its own crappy habits. So we spot these crappy habits and we put ourselves down for them and imagine ourselves in a way. We don't imagine ourselves to be superior, but we imagine we ought to be superior, and that makes us feel bad. Actually, we couldn't be superior because one ego is as bad as another, as I keep saying. So if resistance isn't the answer to addiction, what is? And the answer to that is, unsurprisingly enough, not resistance, non-resistance, no dependence upon ideas that we might have, but just being conscious of who we are, of what's going on, just being conscious of it. And if we are conscious of it without distracting ourselves by giving out to ourselves the whole time, condemning ourselves the whole time, promising that we're going to be better, making up excuses to explain why we have to go and take heroin or have a drink. In other words, whatever it is we experience whatever it is we do without making excuses. We just see ourselves doing it. And that's just like being, it's like if I'm being a jerk, jerks carry on to be jerks because they never see they're jerks. They think they're great. They think that everyone else is the jerk, obviously. So they carry on forever being a jerk, which is sad. It's unfortunate. But if I see that, if I'm consciously a jerk, I transform because it's abhorrent to my very core nature and it hurts me. And out of that pain, change comes about because pain is the anything that can facilitate me to change. Not necessarily any pain, but the pain that comes with honestly observing myself will facilitate change. Controlling myself is the way we all think it works, but it isn't, because I control myself in order to kind of be better because I can't bear to observe myself. So I have plans and I make promises and I enlist in various groups, etc., etc. But all of that is just red herrings. All I need to do, what I need to do is to observe myself, whatever way I am to observe it. And that honest self-observation, which is gentle and it's not condemning, it's just seeing what's true, will bring about change if we've got the stomach to see ourselves. Without giving out to ourselves, without distracting ourselves with drama, just to see it, which is a quiet thing. Not a big drama, it's not a big noisy thing. It's not like being in a group where you have to say all this shite. Just observe. And out of that observation, change will occur. Because this is the way change does occur. It's the only way it ever has occurred, it's the only way it ever will occur. Through honest self-observation, which doesn't come out of the mind. The mind cannot self-observe. If I observe myself with the mind, I will always be evaluating, I will always be judging, I will always be saying this is good, this is bad. The mind cannot do that because it is a system of good and bad. It's a system of evaluations, it's a system of judgment. Like when we talk about, don't judge yourself. As long as we're stuck in our minds, we cannot not judge because every thought is a judgment, as Eckhart Tolle says. It's no good being orientated from the thinking mind and trying to self-observe. That's impossible for thought to do that. Consciousness, on the other hand, can do it because that's what consciousness does. It's like a small child that observes with curiosity, genuine curiosity. It's got no agenda. So in a way, we can relate that consciousness to the inner child, and we can relate the mind to the adult, the sophisticated, complicated adult, which is really a corruption of consciousness. A sad corruption of consciousness. So what we need to do is to get better at observing ourselves from the point of view of consciousness, not from the point of view of the thinking mind. Okay, thanks for watching.